Hey, Matt. All right, let's talk through the Euthyphro. There's two things in the Euthyphro that I find really fascinating that I really want to spend some time talking about, and I'm really interested in knowing, Matt, what you see in it and what you want to get out of it. So, the first is really about how and why to inquire. The Euthyphro is one of several of Plato's dialogues that ends in aporia, or this state of not knowing the truth. We find ourselves kind of in a bind, not sure uh, how to proceed and discover the thing that we're after. What we're after in the Euthyphro is piety. But since, right, the dialogue ends with the characters not knowing what piety is, I find it really interesting to talk about and think about what the point of the dialogue is at all, and to think about what the dialogue tells us about how to inquire into these things. What's the benefit of inquiring into the nature of these things, especially if we really can't come to a conclusion? Why do we ask what piety is if at the end we don't know what piety is? Why does Plato bother writing this? Why do the thousands and thousands, right? I mean, the number of people involved in this text getting to us, right, is massive, right? It was copied and copied and copied. It was memorized and copied. Um, so that this one has survived. There's a lot of people who think that this is a very significant text, who thought that it was worth their efforts to preserve it, but it doesn't tell us what piety is. So what do we try to get out of this? I think something about the way we use the way we use and the way we seek these big general terms, particularly the the virtues, piety, justice. I mean, these are some big ones, but and what's the relationship between the virtues and the divine is the second thing, right? The Euthyphro is kind of the text in Western philosophy for thinking about the relationship between the divine and morality. So, I mean, that's something that in my own upbringing was a really complicated, difficult problem for me, thinking about what makes these things right and wrong. I've got commandments, I've got, I think, young me thought revealed sources from God specifically telling us what to do and what not to do. Um, but but that doesn't answer the Euthyphro question. That's actually the background for the Euthyphro dilemma. What is the relationship, right? If we know that, if we accept that murder is bad, that murder is wrong, and that murdering is somehow even an offense against the gods, uh, what is how do we think about that? How do we think about uh, the divine wanting us not to murder, and murder being bad, right? Is it uh, that the gods don't want you to murder it that makes it bad, or is it the other way around, that it's bad that they don't want you to murder it? And both positions are rather difficult. Anyway, so let's start with the first one. Uh, Euthyphro and Socrates. Did you get much time, Matt, to read?
I went through it twice.
Ah, nice. Good.
Yes.
All right. So at the beginning, right? Euthyphro is very confident that he knows what piety is, and Socrates says, "I don't know," which is typical Socrates stuff, right? Um, and let's see, the video that I already posted gives us a little background from the Apology, where Socrates describes these tests, these examinations. Right? He finds someone who thinks they know shit, and he asks and finds out, oh, they don't know shit. And this is supposed to be a service to them, but they end up hating him and ultimately killing him for it.
This feels like an experience that possibly we can all relate to.
Yeah, well, I don't know about all. No, there's a lot of Euthyphros out there, but but those of us who are reading Plato are probably relating to it pretty strongly. I really want to know. And so I'm asking the people who think that they know, and they don't want to talk about it. Um, what do we do with that, right? I mean, we got to learn to think for ourselves for one thing, right? If the authorities, if the people who are trading in piety and justice and some don't want to answer our questions, then yeah, we got to find the other people. We think we could help them maybe, but you can lead a horse to water anyway. So Euthyphro is prosecuting his father because it's the pious thing to do. He thinks he knows what piety is, but he's not really willing, is he, to discuss it? He's willing to share his wisdom, but he's not willing to puzzle through things with it. What do you got, Matt?
It feels like Euthyphro had been taught what piety is in a community that just accepts these without questioning. And
Yeah,
so when Euthyphro uses these terms like giving God like attention, and it just feels like he's never encountered any pushback on what that means. And so as you go through these readings, it's almost like you can feel Euthyphro becoming like more and more frustrated as Socrates asks, yeah, I mean, yeah, I see where you're coming from, but what I'm asking is this. And finally,
yeah,
just like spoiler alert, towards the end, Euthyphro just says pretty much says, I can't handle this, and just leaves.
yeah, yeah. And part of that, I think, uh, Matt, maybe you and I are identifying with Euthyphro in that way, and that's good for us because we should have that kind of empathy. And we should see, we want Plato to be describing people like us who are. I mean, okay, so let me pare it back. What I'm hearing you saying, Matt, because I do get the wrong end of the stick sometimes. Uh, Euthyphro's adopting what he's heard from his community. He's confident in it because it's the air he's been breathing in, right? This is the language he was brought up in. So there's not a whole lot of space to doubt it. This, I think you're right. This is a very common experience, particularly amongst younger people, I think.
I see this a lot with and no, like, I'm not trying to be demeaning in this, but I see this a lot in people who were born in a certain denomination
Yeah,
when they encounter other denominations, specifically
yeah,
I'm American, obviously. um Christians, I see a lot of this
yeah.
from them. And like I said, I don't mean to be demeaning in that. It's just an
Oh,
observation.
right. Yeah, absolutely. I have a Christian upbringing. When I practice, I still have a Christian practice. Non-dogmatic now is the big thing. Non-judgment, I think, ends up becoming once you leave the dogmatism of it, non-judgment and love really ends up being what the religion is. If you, and once you get rid of dogma, it's interesting to see what becomes of religion, and practice ends up really being what it is, I think. Yeah, anyway, I read some Confucius and got a lot of interesting things about the power of ritual from it. And it makes me not want to throw out religion altogether. But yeah, I have this experience of being Euthyphro. Not well, actually, I think maybe that's not what was going on in Euthyphro, but I think this is a good reading of Euthyphro and one that we should engage with a lot. I have this experience of thinking that repeating what the other people told to me in my community is the way to clarify these things, right? Knowledge, wisdom is dropped from heaven. It's dropped into my ears somehow. I mean, maybe with some mediation. And then when the right context comes around, I'll repeat what fell into my ears. And then when people have questions, or let's say when people, yeah, when people question me and I don't have the answers for it, uh, it's disorienting. Like this is where I thought wisdom was found, and now I'm being asked to to find a wisdom to evaluate it. How does one do that? I mean, at a certain point, you're so disoriented, you just have to give up. You just have to give up if you don't have the answers, and you think that from heaven is where they fall. Okay, so Euthyphro here being the genuine, uh, he's being very genuine. This reading of Euthyphro, right? Euthyphro really puts a lot of stock in what piety is, but he doesn't understand it. Okay, um, and then so what does Plato want us? If this is what Euthyphro is, if this is who the character of Euthyphro is, uh, what might Plato want us to think about Euthyphro? You got ideas?
I I think yes, I have words. I just need to
Oh
get
yeah,
them
yeah.
from here to yeah. um, I think I don't think Socrates wants us to think little of Euthyphro.
Mm.
I don't think he means it. Although at a surface read, you can almost read it that way, where it feels like these questions are rhetorical and they almost feel like gotcha questions. I don't think that's Socrates' point, though. I think
Right.
Socrates is genuine in his questions, where he wants you
Yes.
to think deeper about these questions that possibly you're thinking about for the first time.
Yeah, yeah.
And
I
I think there was a bit I wrote down, and it just felt so important when he asks Euthyphro. He says, "If piety is a part of justice, we should inquire which part," because it
yeah.
felt like it may not necessarily have been the crux of the dialogue, but it sure felt like the heart of it. Like
Yeah.
if piety should be defined, if we're going to define it, like how do we define it? And then we come to find out defining piety is really challenging because you put it here and then it excludes this, and there seems like there's no fully full definition that is necessary and inclusive to everything that is in fact piety. And we come to find out that especially in their belief with the pantheon, there may not necessarily be a complete understanding of piety. If
Yeah.
one, I think he mentions, like, if Zeus thinks this and Hera thinks this,
Right, right.
oh, how do you how do you know they all agree on what piety is?
Right. Yeah, yeah. If piety is just what the gods love, then yeah, it might be a multifaceted thing. In other words, no thing. There's no unifying thing in there. But yeah, your previous point, the relationship between piety and justice. I think you're right. He's trying to show us that we don't have the definition, right? If you really knew what piety was and you really knew what justice was, you would really know the way they're related. But you know, you'd be able to identify, say like, hmm, let's say offering a sacrifice. Let's say helping the poor, or let's say being generous to the alien among you. That's one I think we should all focus on a little bit. Uh, Being generous to the alien among you is something that is pious, and it's something that's just. Uh, or maybe let's not say generous. Being fair and compassionate to the alien among you is certainly just. Being unfair is certainly unjust to the alien among you. But it's also pious. So we should be able to understand the sense in which it's pious and distinguish it from the sense in which it's just. And if Euthyphro can't do that, then he really doesn't understand it fully, and there's something further to know than just what he's receiving from his community. I do think, though, that Plato would be a little bit critical of this Euthyphro. If Euthyphro is, well, maybe he wouldn't deserve to be so critical to Euthyphro, right? If Euthyphro is really he's really motivated by piety. If Euthyphro is really motivated by piety, then I think Plato would probably have a lot of sympathy with this kind of character, especially actually. One thing I find really interesting about Euthyphro here is there's an extent to which he's clearly not just receiving his understanding of piety from his community, because he's being criticized. He says he's being criticized for prosecuting his father by his family and by his community, even though it's the pious thing to do. He says that they're judging me for this shows that they don't know what piety is. So if he thinks he's really following what his now, Matt, I don't know what your upbringing. I've got this evangelical upbringing. Maybe you're thinking, but this was me too, right? I was following what I thought was piety and justice and love, uh, and that I thought I was receiving from my community and from my religion. And then it turns out that the people in my community and in my religion aren't doing it and are criticizing me for being loving to the alien among you, perhaps, right? I think there's a lot of ex-evangelicals who have this kind of feeling like, no, but I was following it, and then they're not. But then, right, if that's what's going on, I think Plato would be making Euthyphro out to be some kind of hero. And I think Euthyphro would probably engage longer and deeper with Socrates and be less defensive.
I think if Euthyphro had stopped his understanding of what piety is at this conversation, Socrates would almost certainly be critical of that.
Oh yeah.
But if he took this conversation and really mulled it over and developed what piety meant to him, I think Socrates would really praise that. I think that's
yeah.
The whole point of the dialogue. Indeed.
That's why we inquire. And it doesn't always work right away. Also this evangelical upbringing, we confront people with their sin and stuff. But one thing that I think is important for people who practice this kind of confrontational religion, or in general, right? We have issues with people in our lives, and we need to, talk about those things. We don't always expect people to mull it over in the moment. We have passions. It's hard. It's hard to, especially if something's critical of you. It's hard to have good faith. Take all the criticisms in. It's hard, and I don't think we need to be harsh on people who take some time to mull things over, for sure. I have a hot take on Euthyphro, though. Maybe it's not that hot, but I think that Euthyphro is entirely acting in bad faith. Actually, I think Euthyphro is making a play for his family's estate. And he's using piety, he's using these virtues to justify his actions. No one does this in America. No one ever uses but I think this is part of the point, right? I think this is part of why it's so important and why Socrates is on this mission from God, as this is a Blues Brothers thing, but as he says in the Apology, he is on a mission from the God or the gods to find the people who are really who really know, who are using these terms, but really understand these terms and really care about these terms, are willing to engage with them. And the people who are using them for power are never going to engage in good faith. So the true philosopher, I think, you're always going to find is the person who will take a criticism and ask, okay, how does this change my conception of this thing that I've been after all my life? If you really want to know, you're going to engage. If you're using it to justify your life, you're not going to engage. And Euthyphro very clearly is not engaging early. Well, actually, it's very clear that he's not going to engage from the line, "What good would I be?" Socrates. Or this translation is maybe not my favorite one here, but I wouldn't be much use, Socrates, nor would Euthyphro differ in any way from the majority of men if I did not know all such things with strict accuracy. Euthyphro's entire self-worth, his role in society, what he can do for other people, is tied up in his knowledge of it. So if he doesn't know it, his whole place in society kind of crumbles around him. So he's not going to, right? He's not going to engage. But also, I think it tells us something about something a little scary about all these honorific qualities. Is that they're really I don't know, maybe 9 times out of 10, I don't know what it is, but when people start talking about justice, piety, I mean, especially piety, justice, we can wrap our minds around a little bit better, right? We can actually reason about justice a little bit more easily. Aristotle is as much as Aristotle's understanding of justice is messed up, right? He gets that it's a proportion kind of thing, right? It's it's a proportion between like deserve and gets. And when people get less than they deserve, that's an injustice, right? So there's reasoning with proportions there that you can do to access justice fairly easily through reason, not perfectly, but we have some access to that. Piety is harder though, because it's regarding our relationship with the divine, and the divine, if we have any understanding of the divine at all, if there is any divine at all, we perceive it only dimly through a glass. So we can't really reason to it that effectively, except maybe the way that, Plato here in the dialogue shows us some ways that we can. All right. So for those of us then who are really inquiring, who want to live a pious life, who want to understand piety, not because they want to use it, but because they want to be it. And what lessons does it have for us? And I think part of it is that, we can't identify too much with it. We can't let our self-worth be in the having achieved it, because that's going to close down inquiry. Honestly, in some ways, we can't even think that we have perfect access to it, because that's going to close down the inquiry. We have to continue to pursue. We have to, right? So what Plato puts forward, actually, I mean, what he presents as the Socratic method is kind of it's a dialectic, right? We pursue knowledge imperfectly. We kind of we have a starting place, okay? No shame if you've got faulty beliefs about something. You have a starting place. It's a starting place, right? I try to tell my students as much as I can. Ignorance is not a defect. It is your natural state. not knowing something, right? There's more things that you don't know than things that you know. There are more things that you don't understand than things that you do understand. Not understanding something is human. It's not a defect. Even at your death, there are going to be more things that you don't understand about the world. Ignorance is not a defect, usually. Some things you should know. Some things you should know. Okay, we don't need to take that conversation about, okay, when you're responsible for your knowledge and not. I mean, that is actually where I tend to go with this conversation in a lot of classes. But okay, so uncertainty is not necessarily a bad thing. Not knowing is not necessarily a bad thing. The way to grow for Plato is to continue to inquire. It's to cross-examine. It's a perpetual cross-examination of our beliefs. And what we'll find is that this belief over here is not so good. We can see that it's not, maybe it's getting some things right, but we can see it doesn't hold up to scrutiny. And so we go looking for another one, and then we inquire, and we see the ways in which it's better. But there's always a possibility, right? If it holds up to cross-examination, that doesn't mean, oh, now we found the truth. There may be a time where we jump from this one to that one. And it's kind of like rock climbing in a way. I don't know. I'm not a rock climber, but, we kind of scramble our way towards the truth. I think it's a mistake to think that we ever really find it. It's a journey, and that's okay. Anyway, all right, so that's one question. That's one way of looking at it. Should we turn our attention to the nature of piety? What this dialogue might say about piety now? Let's do that. Let's do that. And I think maybe I need a whiteboard now. Not much of a whiteboard. Let's see. All right. Let's see what we can do here. We've got the Euthyphro dilemma is what we want to look at in particular. I mean, there's multiple accounts of the nature of piety in the Euthyphro, but they're typically pretty bad, except for one or two. All right, so that says the Euthyphro dilemma right over there. Good. And what we're going to do is just type it here. So it's going to take the form of a question. Euthyphro suggests that piety is whatever is loved by the gods. Some little modifications here. We got to say by all the gods, because sometimes, Matt, as you already pointed out, this god wants that thing, that god wants that thing. So maybe if it's what's loved by all the gods, but still, even if that's true, that piety are the things that's loved by the gods, we don't necessarily have a definition yet, because we don't know. Are pious things pious because the gods love them? Or do the gods love pious things because they are pious? Two options here. Now, I have had very intelligent people telling me that it's both somehow. That it's both somehow. I don't know the best way to work this. Okay, I've had very intelligent people telling me that it's both somehow. It can't be both somehow because it's directional, right? And the thing we want to notice is that if the answer is the first horn, dilemmas have horns, right? Like if you got a bull with two horns, you have to grab one or the other. Maybe that's not how the analogy works. I don't care. But you grab one and you're going to get got by the other one. Anyway, so maybe pious things are pious just because the gods love them. So if pious things are pious because the gods love them, then we have a definition that really does give an account. It explains the nature of piety. That the gods love these things is what makes those things pious. Now we have a definition. But are we sure that's the right definition? How do we know that is not the other way around? So it seems as though Socrates is suggesting to us that the truth is on the other side. Oh, this is our first. We're going to do the whole course. We're gonna spend 15 weeks doing this. So, and this is the first day of this course. So I should tell all those people out in YouTube land. In my first philosophy course, I said out loud in class Socrates because I had watched Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure so many times. So no shame. And I think I got a C on my first paper or something. So no shame. I went and got a PhD and everything, you know. It's practice. No one expects everyone to be great right at the beginning. Okay, so Socrates seems to be suggesting, Socrates seems to be suggesting here that the gods love these things because they are pious, which means we still don't know what piety is. If the gods love these things because they're pious, then we can understand why the gods love the sacrifice, why the gods love the prayers, why the gods love the just actions. But we still don't know what piety is. We still need to look at what is the commonality among these things. And, you know, he makes a long, confusing rhetorical argument that I'm not going to pretend to understand about the carried and the carrying. What he seems to be suggesting is that when love is involved, when there's an action involved, that action is going to be explained by the thing, right? So he seems to be using that argument, whether we think it's a good argument or not, I don't think is worth talking that out. But he seems to be using that argument to suggest that the action, that the gods loving these things is going to be explained by the quality of the things. All right. Now, we could focus just on the text and see what is maybe being said about piety here, or maybe we should look, let me say a word or two about how this gets picked up in Christian thought mostly, since that's my background, but this is, you know, a very influential passage in Jewish and Muslim thought as well. So this Western tradition is a much more of a piece than a lot of scholars will want you to believe. There's much more engagement at various times between scholars among these different religions than at other times, than maybe at now. I don't know. We still need to talk to each other more in general. People need to talk to each other more. Bye, TikTok. Anyway. So, where does this go? Well, it ends up being a way of talking about divine command theory. All right, I'm gonna get rid of this whiteboard. Go away, whiteboard. I know how to do this, I think, right? No, I've already messed up doing it. There, the X, of course. All right, so it's nice, I get to edit this. So divine command theory is the claim that, right, it's the theory that morality just comes from the divine. It looks at morality as being kind of analogous to the laws of nations. There's a legislator who who makes the laws and enforces the laws and has sanctions for not following the laws. And so if morality binds us the way that laws of nations bind us, then we need to have a lawgiver. We need to have a legislator responsible for the fact that we ought not to murder. Okay, so that's divine command theory. Morality, ethics comes straight from the divine. Without the divine, there is no ethics, there is no morality. Okay, important thing to note for anyone who's following a religion here, this is not the only religious ethics. Just let's put that out there first. This is not the only religious ethics. Thomas Aquinas rejects divine command theory, for instance. Although there's a way where maybe he's got a 1 foot in one camp and 1 foot in another camp. Divine commands might play a role for Aquinas, but they don't explain what makes good things good and what makes bad things bad for Aquinas. So divine command theory is not the only ethical theory out there for religious people. I think for some of these reasons here, it's not the best moral theory for religious people. It is the best moral theory for religious people in power, I should say. Religions compete. Oh, religious providers, let's call it. They compete with medical providers. They compete with thinkers. They compete with academics. They compete with mental health providers. They compete with rock bands and tarot readings. Right? They compete with the pastor down the street, right? Okay, so if the only ethical theory that you teach to your people, the people under your care, is that morality must come straight from the divine, and I'm the one who helps you see what the divine wants, then, I'm going to compete really, really easily. All right, so divine command theory is the best ethical theory for people who want to use religion for their own power. But it is not the only ethical theory for religious people. And maybe religious people should start looking at why their religious authorities are so committed to divine command theory, or not offering other things too. Anyway, so problems with divine command theory, besides it being used in service of power, the big thing here is the arbitrariness problem. And that is something that Plato is getting at here. If things are pious just because the gods love them, or to retranslate it for divine command theory, if wrong actions are wrong just because God commanded you not to do it, then there's no way to explain why the divine would have commanded you not to murder instead of to murder. There's no explanation for why hurting people isn't good and helping people isn't bad. If there's a reason, right? If you think it wouldn't make sense for God to tell you to murder people, if you think it just doesn't make sense that even though God gives you the commandments and whatever God commands you to do, you should do, that God just couldn't, wouldn't, shouldn't tell you to murder, then divine command theory is not for you. If there's a reason why God says not to murder, then you're not a divine command theorist. If it would have been worse for God to tell you that murder is good, then you're not a divine command theorist, ultimately, right? And the other options are going to say that there's something about these actions that makes it so that those are the ones that make sense for God to command or to forbid. Right? So there's something about murder that makes it unreasonable for the divine to command you to murder. There's something about hurting people that makes it bad for you to hurt people. And that's why, if there's a divine that gives you commands, the divine tells you not to hurt people. So if there's a deeper truth behind the commands, you're not a divine command theorist, at least not a pure divine command theorist, right? And if you're interested, right, I think what Aquinas has going on for him, or actually, this is Robert Merrihew Adams, uh, I think still alive, contemporary philosopher, although his wife died sadly fairly recently, Marilyn McCord Adams. But Robert Adams argues that there is a kind of divine command theory that works, and it's one that says that the content of the commands doesn't come from the will of God. The content of the commands, right? That murder is bad is just a fact about, maybe it's grounded in facts about humanity, facts about natures of things. If we can talk about natures of things, I think we can. But I mean, anyway. So facts about what's right and wrong, facts about what's good and bad come from the natures of things in a kind of Aristotelian way. Aristotle will say there's a fact about what humans need to flourish, not just biologically, but like psychologically, spiritually, you could even say. And those facts about what humans need to flourish are kind of where good and bad end up coming from. It's a good position, I think, and that's kind of Aquinas's position as well. He's got a robust virtue ethics. But then, so what makes it good and bad is one thing, and what makes it immoral, right? What makes it bad to murder people is human nature. What makes it obligatory that you not murder people, obligatory that you not do the bad things, maybe is divine commands. Right? If you really insist that you need this legislator law relationship to get morality, you can have that while saying that the content of good and bad is grounded in the natures of things, and then you get rid of the arbitrariness, but you still have that required legislator if you think that's there. But then you still have, hey, people out there, trying to figure out for themselves what's good and what's bad. They can get somewhere. They just don't understand that they have to. Hey, maybe that's even better. Maybe that's even more moral if you're doing the good things, not because you think you have to, not because you think there's a legislator commanding you to, but just because you sense that it's good. And then we get these other problems with, what's the command, what's God's role here doing for you? Anyway. But also, I think it makes sense for the Aristotle kind of people who say that good and bad come from facts about flourishing, facts about natures. If you really also want a strong role for the divine there, natures, teleology, facts about what natures make most sense, and like purpose and what flourishing looks like for a human versus what flourishing looks like for a pig. Uh, those facts maybe make more sense with a divine blueprint of the kind of thing there. So there might be a role for the divine there still in, what makes it the case that flourishing for a human looks like this. Human nature does. Where does human nature come from? Right? If there's really a thing from that is human nature, and it's not just us trying to kind of abstract away our differences and reach this kind of abstracted human nature. If there's a real thing that is human nature that dictates what flourishing looks like, then that might need a legislator. That might need like a divine architect or something. Anyway, so lots of ways you can go with this kind of thing, but pretty clear, I think. Letting your pastor tell you what's right and wrong is just a bad idea. Something that even religious people should avoid. Maybe especially religious people should avoid. Non-religious people already avoid it. I don't know. What am I saying? Okay, so Cool. All right. So we've got right and wrong. Piety is somehow still needing to be explained at the end here, right? We get to the point where we've got this dilemma. Maybe the pious is pious because the gods love those things, or maybe the gods love those things because they're pious, and then we still need to understand what piety is. And Euthyphro says, okay, but I gotta go. uh, I gotta go get ready to prosecute my father and try to get my, estate and stuff. All right. Now here's the big question, Matt, for us to think about together. I tend to think, and the way I present this to my students usually is, hey, if it's not really about piety, because actually, ultimately, in a classroom where I like start with this, and the class isn't about the divine and morality, we don't even get to the Euthyphro dilemma. We just talk about who's Euthyphro and what is he after, and who's Socrates and what is he after. And at the end, neither of them know what piety is. Is it better to be Socrates somehow? Is it worse to be Euthyphro somehow? And we get into this lovely discussion about Socratic ignorance. Socrates knows that he doesn't know. Euthyphro, maybe. We've got two readings of this now. One says Euthyphro thinks he knows, and the other says Euthyphro pretends that he knows. Clearly, by the end, can Euthyphro still think he knows what piety is? If he does, he doesn't know what knowing is, right? Because it should be really clear by now that he doesn't know. His actions aren't changing. He's still going on to prosecute his father. Does he still think that's the pious thing to do? That was never really at issue in my reading. That was never really what was going on with Euthyphro. He was there to be impressive. And once he saw that he's not going to impress Socrates with his knowledge of piety, he's just out. Like, I'm not interested in it. He's not playing the same game that Socrates is playing, I think. Okay. So now the question is, wait, if that's what the dialogue's really telling us, I would, and I haven't done this before with a class, not quite yet. So Matt, you're the first one. uh, Wait, okay. Now we've spent a little time thinking maybe it's not about piety and seeing what it really is about, and it's about like the way we inquire. Maybe it's about whether we're really inquiring or just using things like justice and piety and so on. Now, maybe we should circle back and ask, wait, does Plato want to teach us about piety? And I think maybe he does, right? There's two ways that Plato's trying to teach us here, pretty clearly, I think. And philosophers tend to focus on the one, and like literary scholars and maybe classicists would focus on the other. I actually don't know a lot of classicists. If you're a classicist out there and want to tell me more about how you approach Plato's texts, let me know. So the philosophers are really interested in the arguments, right? The philosophers want to know what's being taught, what's the structure of the argument, what are the objections, what are the possible responses to the objections, and we look for all the content there. But if you read, Homer or Sophocles or something, you're going to see that the nature of the characters are going to be the thing that tell you about virtues. Who's a good? I don't have. I get most of my classic stuff beyond philosophy from opera. So let's say Alceste or something, right? Alceste offers to sacrifice herself for her husband, king, but also maybe ultimately for the nation. I mean, it is kind of for herself. It's no sacrifice at all, she says in the aria. Ce n'est point de sacrifice. It's no sacrifice at all because how can I go on living without him anyway? Okay, but the things that these people do, right? The people often embody something, right? And Alceste maybe is embodying some kind of familial devotion that we could learn from. Uh, Often these characters are embodying a virtue or embodying some vice. And it's interesting to see people like Achilles in the Iliad, who Achilles has all the strengths. Achilles is like the hero's hero in the Iliad. So much so that, you know, when he gets slighted by Agamemnon, he says, "That's fine. You don't want to give me my spoils." She's a human, Briseis, but you know, you don't want to give me my spoils. That's fine. Me and my crew are going to go sit over here and watch you get slaughtered by the Trojans for a while. You need me, and I know this, and I'm going to act like you need me. And this is Achilles having appropriate pride. Achilles is strong. Achilles is virtue is strength. Right? Achilles is strong. Achilles is virtuous, and so he's acting like it. He knows his worth, and he's acting like it. He's got all these strengths. But then we've got this really important episode, even in the movie Troy, where Achilles' boyfriend Patroclus gets killed by Hector, and so when Achilles kills Hector, he his rage is too much. He acts shamefully by dragging Hector, who is a strong, virtuous person himself, drags Hector around the city on the back of the chariot in full view of his parents, letting you know. It's he humiliates him. He doesn't need to, and it's out of rage. This is a vice, and it gets him into trouble. Ultimately, the gods reject Achilles because of this, and he ends up dying or something along those lines. So the characters play a large role in these things. I think the reason that Plato writes in dialogue is twofold, right? There's the reason the philosophers love is because now we get multivocality, right? We can have multiple perspectives. We can see the cross examination going, right? We can follow the positions, the arguments, the objections. We can follow the dialectic better when we've got multiple positions being represented. We've got multiple voices being represented. That's really useful for the philosopher. That's really useful for the philosophy student. But philosophers, I think, ignore too much the role of the characters here. And it's obvious. I mean, we know Plato, obvious. I mean, Socrates, obviously. It's important that he chooses Socrates. Like, you know, the author of Ecclesiastes chooses Solomon to be the voice there. That's important. That's clearly to display to us some virtues because he's giving us a portrait of his hero. So we're obviously supposed to emulate Socrates and not knowing what we don't know and pursuing it. And we're obviously supposed to not emulate Euthyphro. Now, in a sense, it's pretty clear to me because Euthyphro is being critiqued that Euthyphro is not fully in line with the values of his community. And that seems like something that Plato would celebrate. Your free thinking, your you're being critical of what you've received from your community. That's what you're supposed to do. But in the course of the dialogue is pretty clear that he's not doing this in good faith. He doesn't really want to know. He wants to share. He wants to look impressive. He wants an authority, you know, someone else with a reputation for wisdom backing his play in some sense, right? So turning back then to the way the narrative can teach us it's certainly about inquiry in some way. It's certainly about how we learn, how we engage, but maybe it's about piety too. I don't know. What do you think, Matt? Having looked at it, having read through it twice, and now we're thinking it doesn't teach us about piety through the arguments. I mean, maybe it does a little, but it's not just the ignorance. I think Socrates is being more pious than Euthyphro in some ways. And maybe that paying attention to the characters teaches us about piety too. What are the gods? What is it to be appropriate, uh, appropriately virtuous with regard to the gods? I don't know. You thoughts?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up that duality because on my first read, my gut reaction was that Socrates was the one who was acting in bad faith because a lot of these questions felt
Yeah,
so rhetorical. It seemed like Socrates knows what piety is and he's trying to lead Euthyphro there.
yeah,
On my second reading, I had considered what if Socrates actually does not know what piety is. And on this reading, I thought, oh, I've had this conversation. I've talked to people who know what God thinks. And then when you press them, you kind of figure out that these are not
yeah,
questions that they've considered before.
yeah,
And it feels like, especially considering are things good because God loves them, feels like a losing position. Because if God loves murder, we know murder's bad, right?
yeah,
But on the other hand, if things are pious, if God loves them because they're pious, that also feels like a losing position from a theological point of view. Because as an atheist, maybe I can appeal to that, and I don't need God. So
yeah,
it feels like both of these positions are bad positions.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, if certainly if your subservience to a religious institution is part of, yeah, I mean, thinking about God, thinking about the divine, let's say. I want to keep this as inclusive as we can. Um, Thinking about what role the idea of God plays in our lives is an interesting thing. You know, people will tell you questioning God is the impious thing, right? But not if you're doing it in good faith. I mean, there are enough good religious leaders out there who will tell you. I shouldn't say religious leaders. Caring people in profession in religious professions, I should say, uh, who will tell you that doubting God is not a sin. Who will tell you that, hey, follow the example of Jesus in the garden, of crying out, of being mad, of being sad, of wondering, of feeling abandoned by God and not feeling like feeling abandoned by God is going to make God abandon you. It's the people who say, here's the answer, now you better stop thinking about it, that are using God, that are being impious about it, right?
it
You,
sure
it, yeah,
it sure feels like the people who say, I know what God's saying, listen to me. It sure it sure can come across as them saying, I'm God. Like I'm the one you need to listen to because
oh,
I know what's right. And that feels like it can lead to bad places. We'll leave it there.
yeah. Oh, all right. Let me tell you this, Matt. Uh, my religious upbringing, I watched Shiny Happy People recently. Uh documentary on HBO about the Duggars, and kind of had a bit of a revelation because the arch villain on that is what's his name? Uh I can't come up with a name, which is a shame because I this is a name I want to say as often as it occurs to me because he's an evil person.
Remind me, are the Duggars the ones with like 15 kids?
And counting, whatever that is. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Or
Uh
is that the same family who like one of the sons assaulted his younger? Oh,
yes.
sorry to bring that up. I just making sure we're talking about the same.
You're right. Bill Gothard was the rapist slash spiritual leader of the small sect that the Duggars were involved with. Bill Gothard, eventually was acknowledged to be a wicked fraud who was abusing people, but his teachings were very. He had this umbrella thing. If you're a child, you're only really safe under the umbrella of your parents' authority. If you're a wife, if you're a woman, you're only safe under the umbrella of a man's authority, your husband's authority, your father's authority. I can hardly say these things with a straight face. Sorry. If you're a big ass man, you're only safe under the authority of your pastor, and if you're the pastor, you're only safe under God's authority. Okay, divine authority is a trickle down thing, emphatically trying to make you feel unsafe. This is spiritual abuse. Okay. I found later that the group of churches, actually, the specific church I was raised in, early in, I was a small child at the elementary school or before, early in the existence of that church, like they all went to a Bill Gothard seminar and stuff, and all that umbrella stuff was like in the air around us. And I bring it up because actually explicitly, it's kind of an analogy, but I was taught that you have to act as, you have to play the role of God for your children.
I
You have to
was
play
taught
the
similarly.
such I don't have strong enough words to say about how horrible this is. No person is God to you. No person can play the role of God to you. And look, we can make religious arguments for this. Actually, this is something another thing I think is really interesting in the Euthyphro. We can make religious arguments for this and say, hey, look, we've got this story in the Gospels of the veil being ripped, right? We've got these ideas of the high priesthood of all individuals, right? We've got religious traditions that are meant to combat that kind of bullshit. So anyway, it it is impious to use religion in these ways. It is impious to put yourself in the role of God to other people, to set yourself up as the mediator between other people and God. And I'm even willing to extend this to some translators and publishers of sacred texts. Sometimes the work you're doing is kind of putting yourself as God to these other people. Oh
Looking at
my
you,
God.
NIV translators.
Yeah. Yeah. Or publishers of the Trump Bible. I mean, you're making money off of being God to other people, of trying to be the mediator between people and God. You are the impious one here. Okay. Separate, sort of unrelated thing, but it's something I really like in the Euthyphro. when Euthyphro goes to give a religious justification of his action, I think it's really interesting. He says how little they know about what's pious and impious. After all, Zeus, the mightiest. I don't. This is a paraphrase, maybe. I don't know. Uh, Zeus, the mightiest of the gods, right? Attacks his own father naturally, and he's got the story of uh, uh, what's Zeus's chaos? No, it's below whatever. Saturn devouring his children, right?
Chronos.
Kronos, yes, thank you. Kronos, but the art depiction I'm most used. Saturn devouring his children. I love that Goya painting. And so Zeus asked to defeat Kronos to free the rest of the gods or whatever. Maybe he gets gobbled up too. I don't know. One of the interesting things that I like, actually, again, going back to the publishers and translators, in the oral traditions, you tell the story to your own ends emphatically, right? And so there is a question of, hey, are you using this story of Zeus in a pious way? Or are you using the story of Zeus for your own ends, right? Without a text, a written text, uh, solidifying this is the only message, right? Deviate from it at risk of deviating from the wisdom dropped from heaven. Not, let's evaluate how we're scrambling to the divine down here. So he says, after all, there's nothing wrong with me prosecuting my father because Zeus also prosecutes his father.
And of course, he picks Zeus, right? The god above gods. Couldn't
Right,
have been
right. The
anyone
god
else.
of the gods. Yeah. But so if this is a model of, I think this is also a model of the kind of religious reasoning, religious argumentation that Plato has no time for. If you just want to say, hey, by analogy, this thing happened in the Bible and it's kind of like what's happening in my life. So, can't criticize. God commands genocide in the Bible, and so are you really going to say that the genocide that I'm committing is impious? No. All right. What is piety here, people? Can we just use the text however we want to? Can we just use the virtues? Can we just use these things, right? Wisdom, justice, piety, knowledge, the good. If we think we have them and we're using them and we're justifying ourselves with them, that's, I think, the impiety that Plato really wants us to see. If we're really wanting to know so that it can inform what we're doing, and the religious leaders used to tell me this too, and I took these things to heart and I said, yes, that's right. If but they put it this way, right? If you're judging the Bible, you're being impious. But if you are judging yourself by the Bible, you're being pious. I'm not altogether unhappy with that. I mean, maybe I've outgrown this, but certainly there are people who manipulate the Bible to their own ends, and there are people who engage with their sacred texts in good faith and take the story, take the episode, uh, take the story of Job, for instance. Right? I wrote a dissertation on the problem of evil. I helped some students write some undergrad theses on the book of Job. Hi, Hannah, if you see this, good job. It's a very important text. What does it mean? It doesn't tell you what it means. You have to figure out what it means. Now, the text puts some guidelines on it. You can't read the book of Job and say, hey, if you're suffering, it must be that God just hates you. If you're suffering, it must be you did something wrong. If you read the book of Job and think that suffering is a result of your wrongdoing, you can't have the right interpretation. Not to say that there's, a right interpretation, but the text does put some guardrails on
There are
that limit.
certainly wrong ones.
They're definitely wrong ones. There are better and worse ones. There are insightful ones. There are wrong-headed ones. Okay, so yeah, if you read the text at trying to discover the relationship between, say, suffering and wrongdoing, then yeah, I think you're doing it piously. Even if you're like, I need to use everything I have in my mind to understand what this text means. And even if you think, look, if the text means this thing, this interpretation of the text, I think, is actually making a mistake. This interpretation of the text might be a fine interpretation of the text, but I think in some situations it's leading us away from virtue instead of towards it. And then you might say, hey, look, this interpretation of the text, I think, has something deep and insightful for me in this thing I'm trying to figure out. We can critique the text. We can interpret the text. We can apply all the scholarship that we have access to the meaning of the text. That's not impious. But if we take the text as a way of saying, hey, look, I'm right, and other people need to start listening to me, then I mean that's the impiety, I think, that Euthyphro is getting at here. Plato uses the gods. Plato tells stories about the gods. Plato tells stories about the afterlife that he full well knows he can't know the truth, the strict truth of. He'll use these things, but in good faith. He'll use them to ends that he think are empowering for people, that are actually pulling people away from the manipulation. Anyway, maybe this is too much me, right? It has to. Well, I mean, it has to in part be me because it speaks so perfectly to my background, and I've read it and taught it over and over and over again. But I think it is for audiences that are anything like you and me, maybe, because you seem to be nodding along with a lot of of my biographical things too. So anyone who's like the audience of you and me, this is just a great place to start seeing that we need to inquire, that we shouldn't be afraid of not knowing. We shouldn't, and we should worry about being controlled even by the things we hold sacred.
That's a hard position to take too.
It is. I want to be a pious person. I want to do right by the divine, whatever that means. I want to live well. I want to flourish. I want to live rightly. I think some people think those are at odds. Some people think those go together. I tend to think that they go together. You can't be flourishing if you're not living rightly. But I don't think that's I think actually that's really interesting because it goes the other way, right? Doing the things that have you flourishing, you don't have to worry about living rightly. If you understand it right, they are the same things, right? Taking appropriate risks to help other people is part of living rightly, is part of flourishing. If you don't take appropriate risks to help people, you're going to find yourself not flourishing. So morality and these facts about human nature, I do tend to be Aristotelian. You could say Thomist about it, but I tend to read more Aristotle. Anyway, so it is a good place to say, hey, look, our reasoning isn't perfect. we don't get to the truth all the time that we're looking for it, but it still makes sense to ask. It still makes sense to inquire, and we grow from it. Socrates is much more likely to have to be living a pious life, let's say, right? Forget the fact that maybe Socrates doesn't know what piety is. He knows better than Euthyphro does. I mean, maybe we need to stop getting bent out of shape about true and false and start thinking about uh, who we are and what we're doing. One other interesting thing, and maybe this is for my Christian audience if I have one, my religious audience if I have one. There's an interesting thing about the symposium, and that's that Plato has Socrates say that he understands something. The topic of the symposium is the nature of love. And oh, there's this interesting thing actually where I mean, I think I tell it like a joke. It starts by saying, like the big question is, what does it take to be the masterful lover? Philosophers do it deeper. Anyway, yeah, gross. Anyway, sorry. But that's what Socrates says that he knows. That's the thing that Socrates says he understands. Like, let's talk about love because I feel like this is the one thing that I feel like I understand. And he tells us what Diotima tells us about love, which is basically that to be the masterful lover is to pursue the truth, is to pursue the good. So it's about pursuit. Love is about pursuit. Okay, tying this into religion, if you want to like be pious, be religious, but you're worried about not knowing, not having the truth, maybe all you need is love. Uh, Go look at the message of Jesus again. Maybe all you need is love. Maybe you don't need the beliefs. Maybe you don't need the doctrines. Maybe just understanding love really well and practicing it really well is religion, is what matters. And truth, maybe we should evaluate it in the ways that it helps us to live that loving life. Anyway, I secretly think Plato in this way is kind of a pragmatist sometimes, where it's not really about what's true, but it's about what works, what gets you on the right track. Which is why he's happy to criticize his own ideas. The Parmenides gives a long sustained critique without good answers to Plato's theory of forms, the like central Platonic doctrine. Yeah, I don't know. We don't always get knowledge. We don't always need knowledge. We need to inquire, and I think we need to love, and they tend to be the same. Focusing on piety, listening to what other people are telling us about piety. If we don't really understand it, if we don't really engage in it, if we just take what they tell us and close our minds on that definition, maybe we don't have the piety we're after. So Plato, as much as he talks about the just, the pious, the good, if we think we have them, someone's probably closing our minds. If we're inquiring after them, we're living piously. I think that's what this text is about. Anyway, it's one of my favorites. Oh, do you have any last words, Matt? I'm going to stop the recording in a sec.
Yeah, I was kind of glad you brought up the Bible because my most intellectually honest position is that I'm agnostic, but colloquially I tell people I'm an atheist. I grew up 30 years in the church. These past 5 years, 5, 6, whatever it is now,
Yeah.
I have been, more specifically, I think the past 2 or 3, I've been atheist, and then maybe more questioning those previous years. But I grew up really intimately with the Bible, and so this particular dialogue really reminded me of Mark, where
Mm,
specifically the ending, if you're unfamiliar, right, there's like 4 or 5 endings. Most scholars think that it just ends kind of like really open-endedly, like they were
mm.
afraid of, and then that's the end. And it
Ah,
just kind of really reminded me of like it almost feels like it ends open-endedly on purpose.
mhm.
And one scholar I was listening to said that Mark ends that way because the author of Mark wants you to consider these things beyond just like, oh, I read it, now I'm done. No, no, Mark wants you to think about this, and I feel like I'm getting that same vibe from this dialogue between Euthyphro and Socrates.
Yeah, yeah. I love that it doesn't really have uh, a doctrine to you got to think through the characters. You got to think through the arguments because that's all it offers you. It doesn't just say, "Hey, here's the truth. Don't worry about it." People who say, "Hey, here's the truth. Don't worry about it." Uh, yeah, stay away from those people.
I think
Unless they're
Socrates would go.
doing geometry. Unless they're doing geometry, maybe. But then you can already check.
I'm getting the vibe that Socrates would really enjoy that we're talking about this some 2,000 years later.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, Matt. Well, let's call it a day. I hope to see you next week. And yeah,
I
stay in
really
touch.
enjoyed the time. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. Oh, thank you for being here. Really, really thank you.
Bye now.